Tuesday, everybody. My name is Scott, the Motor City Madmouth Show, and this is the Motor City Madmouth Show. I am pleased to be joined by LA Sportscaster Fred Wallin. Fred, welcome to the broadcast.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Really am.
We're going to have a lot of fun, that's for sure. So just to let everybody know that, Fred and I are old school media kind of guys. We've seen a lot. He's read 20 pages of my book so far, and he only has another 180 to go, but I know that by the time I get on his gig, which I'll talk about in a little while, Fred will be enlightened, and we certainly will be able to compare a couple of stories nevertheless. So before I go any further, the Motor City Madmouth Show is being broadcast around the world. The audio version of the Motor City Madmouth Show can be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcast. Please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube, South Florida Tribune. We're striving for more subscribers. Please also comment, like, and share the broadcast. Want to be a guest? Participate in the chat room, one way to do it, or send your topic ideas to South Florida Tribune at gmail.com. Want to advertise coffee officially? Give me a call, 954-304-4941. We broadcast live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. I'll get to other information shortly. Meanwhile, Fred, once again, I'm glad to have you on the show. So why don't you give the audience a little bit of an introduction about yourself?
Well, I was brought up in Culver City, California, which is like West LA. I was going to play basketball at the University of Arizona. I go down there and I take the physical, and they say I have scoliosis, which is a curvature of the back. And so my parents take me to the best doctors there are, and Dr. Robert Curlin, Dr. Frank Jobe, the Dodger doctors here in Southern California. And they were going to do a spine surgery. And 2 days before, Dr. Curlin called me up. So help me, Scott. And he said, I want to see you. So I drove to Westchester, which is, 5 miles away from Culver City. And he said, how much do you love basketball? And he said, well, I said, I sleep with a basketball more than I sleep with women. So he started laughing. And he said, I was pretty good in basketball myself. And I got arthritis. And so I decided to help the athletes rather than be an athlete. So I put my hand up and I said, you're saying it's the spine, it's dangerous. And he says, 1 in a million, but it's the spine. I said, thank you very much. And later, of course, I did Dodger Talk for KBC and the Dodger Radio Network. And Dr. Frank Jobe, a lot of times, was up in the press box with us. So we had a lot of fun laughing about what had happened a few years earlier. But so that's basically it. I've done a lot of LA shows. I'm doing now Sports Overnight America, where you're going to be a guest next month in April. And it's heard Friday and Saturday nights. I do it from home. And I do a thing for a company called Believe, BLEAV. And you can hear that anywhere. And then I do one for a company called Pod Clips. And they're heard around the world. But they don't do it like you do through the stream thing. We just do it Zoom. So I got to give you a lot of credit for that.
Wasn't an easy transition. So, all right, you talked about Sports Overnight America, and also I saw that you're connected with Sports Byline USA as well, right? Because I know
Sports Byline. I work for Sports Byline, and the show is Sports Overnight America.
All right. So what I'd like you to do, Fred, is why don't you give the audience an idea of what you're doing with both of them, with these media outlets, and give them an overview of not only who you're working for, but the show itself.
Well, we get into the political world of sports, the economic world of sports, and I'm probably more political than always have been than even sports oriented. And we talk about that. I've got two co-hosts in Art Source and Mark Mancini, and Mark happens to be the world's worst sports handicapper. Art used to kick field goals for USC and the LA Rams. And I almost played basketball at Arizona. So that's the trio. And let me tell you a funny story. I did not know this was a Michigan-oriented show. Obviously, you call it the Motor City Show. Okay. Most of my relatives are in Michigan. And about 15 years ago, 12, 13, 14 years ago, on Sports Overnight America, I interviewed a person named Alan Rosenfeld. Okay. He wrote a great boxing book. Okay. And about 2 years after that, I see a picture on Facebook, a family portrait from Michigan in the 40s or 50s, but it's a picture that my mother had given me, a photo my mother had given me. So after I interviewed him, I discovered that his daughter, my cousin, lives 5 miles from us here in Southern California. So because Alan Rosenfeld who's passed away now, knew boxing, and I love talking boxing, and he knew more than anybody. Because he came on the air, I found like 50 cousins I didn't know I had.
Really?
They're all in Michigan. They all went to Michigan or Michigan State. So the day that those two meet in football, they all meet at somebody's house. It's about 70-30 Michigan over Michigan State, but it's fun to watch.
I got to tell you one thing about Mark Mancini. I've worked with him on a lot of projects. I'm sure you've seen us do a lot of stuff together. And one thing I'll say, a couple of things I can say about Mark Mancini, who, by the way, is in the book, just so you know when you get around to it, okay? One of the most candid characters I've ever seen, one of the nicest people I've ever seen. But I'll tell you one thing that a lot of people underrate about the guy, he's really knowledgeable, too. He really is. I mean, we know he's a Dodgers hater, so I tell Mark, you know what, remember one thing, I know you like the Pirates, but you haven't won in ages, okay? And I know you're a Padres guy and you don't like the Dodgers, but yet you're living there. But I've done a lot of projects with Mark, Fred, and I'll tell you, I really have enjoyed every single show that I have actually gone ahead and been on with the guy. I really do. And, you know, again, we're like two crazy brothers anyways. Every time he does something crazy, I treat him like my little piñata and whack him over the head, and he stands there and takes it good-heartedly. You know, again, like two crazy brothers that are old school, okay? We're always going to get on each other's nerves, but we loved it because you know what it's like being in this business, how you can take a guy and build off of him and feed off of him and really have a lot of fun with it. And I'm telling you, like I said, I have nothing negative whatsoever to say about Mark Mancini. And yes, he earned his way into Lessons on the Microphone. All right, to the chat room real quick. Katie, George Eichhorn, High School, and Fred, great show. Michigan has a great history with boxing. Oh, does it ever? I mean, we all know about the Thomas Hearns. We all know about Joe Louis, just to name a couple. So there's no question that there's a great thing there. So, all right. So with that said, what's it like to work in the LA market? I know you, one of the things listed on here was KABC AM 790.
Well, I mean, I did Dodger Talk for a few years, and the general manager had offered me an extra $5,000, and it's a long story, but the point is he refused to give me it, and so I left the station for $5,000, which was the dumbest move anybody in the history of radio ever met. I still might be there now, I don't know, but although the ratings at KBC when I was there, they were like 4.7. Before that, you know, I was in college. I produced shows at KBC. Ironically, later I worked at KBC, but when I was producing the show, I produced the Bill Russell show and shows like that at KBC, and not the shortstop, the center, the center for the Celtics, who won 11 times in 13 years, Bill Russell. But anyway, the point is they had like a 7 rating, and folks were talking about how many listeners you have, and a 7 in LA means hundreds of thousands of listeners. 20 years later, when I was working at KABC, we're down to 4.7, and now they're like a 0.3 or a 0.4. So KBC now is really not doing too well and hasn't for a long, long time. Things do change in radio, Scott. I know you know that.
Oh, yeah, totally. Well, you know, we have a guy named Joshua Bernstein. Says, what's going on? Fred Wallin is here. And Josh, just to give you a little information about him, though, Fred is one of the guys in my pipeline that I'm actually training to become a broadcaster. So we're gradually easing him into the program, and his knowledge and energy is off the chart. So I like to train young guys and see what kind of enthusiasm that they have, work ethic. And I have a lot in my system. Joshua is just the latest one in my system that I'm looking to groom into doing some things. So we're working on some things there.
Can I say something to Zach?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Zach,
no,
if you can go to law school, go to law school. It's a much better business than radio. Just both of my brothers went to law school, and it's a different situation. You end up owning your own firm. You make the decisions. The general manager and the program director does not. Now, work for Scott. but just looking ahead, understand how tough this business really is.
All right, Joshua, you got some good advice from a guy that's been in the business forever, like I have. So there you go. But Joshua Bernstein, Fred Wallin, you are now connected forever. All right, well, and thanks for the kind words. I appreciate it. All right, so as we continue on, are there any individuals that you actually enjoyed working with, whether it's just colleagues or whether it's particular, you name it? I'm just saying any individuals, leave it open-ended for you to answer.
I don't think anybody has ever done a better talk show than Bill Russell. He was the most honest, incredible human being I've ever heard do a radio talk show. He said, he at the time he wasn't signing autographs, and he said, my dad was a bricklayer, and nobody asked him, and he was a better bricklayer than I was a talk show host, but nobody was better than Bill doing radio. And ironically, when Bill got the offer to move up to Seattle, the program director, Bob Walsh, asked me to go with him. And I should have, but I didn't. And Bob Walsh became a very, very big person in Seattle. And Bill Russell, of course, was up there for a long period of time, too. And I should have gone. I didn't. I had a girlfriend at the time. It was a bad move. And again, it's another bad decision in a radio career. And that was when I was in college. So I think Bill Russell is the answer to your question, because he just was very honest. And most of the time when you're doing a talk show, you think what I should say and what I really believe. In the 90s, I'm at KMPC radio in LA.
Well, let me ask you a quick question about Russell. Are you talking about the Celtics guy or the Dodgers guy now?
Oh, the Celtic guy.
Okay, just want to make sure we're consistent. All right, continue.
No, the best center of the
right. I know
the biggest winner in the history of the NBA, 11 championships in 13 years. You can't do much better than that. I'm a Laker fan, but you can't do better than 11 out of 13 years. Anyways, I'm at KMPC in on the day that Magic Johnson announces that he has HIV. And so that was the conversation for months and months and months. And I said on the air, my 8-year-old son, I wouldn't want him to play competitive sports against other 8-year-old kids if they have HIV. Okay. And you couldn't say that. You shouldn't say that. Right. And this is before too many people had computers and this, so they got letters at the station and everything else. And the general manager brought me into the office and I said, Bill Ward was GM. That's what I believe. I'm not talking about going to school. I'm saying competitive sports. It's a blood to blood illness. And at that point, it was fatal all the time. I knew that. And I had lost my little brother when he was 7 to leukemia. So I have seen death. And I've seen people die. And I've seen people at 7 years of age, and he was a super genius, and he was going to skip 2 grades in school, and he never had an opportunity because he died August 23rd, he died a long time ago. But anyway, the point is, sometimes if you say something that you really believe, you can get into hot water. Bill Russell didn't care. Russell would say anything he wanted. He knew, it wasn't his life, but the people that are relying on a talk show for their livelihood, most people think very closely before they say anything. And Scott, you've been doing this for years. Right. You know what I'm saying. There are certain things, you might not believe, but you have to say. And, I think 99% of the time I'm honest, but there's always something you're holding back. And some guys hold back a whole lot.
Fred, let me tell you something, my friend. You're right. We've been doing this a while. Okay. If you have a hot mic, you can get in hot water, period. Okay. With that said, Joshua Bernstein, go ahead, put the question up here. What's the biggest person you've worked with, Fred?
Well, Bill Russell was 6'11".
6'11". Big. He's going big 6'11" style shots. All right.
I know. I work with a lot. I work with a sportscaster and actor Stu Nahan here in Southern California on KABC. I worked with super fan Ed Beeler, who only had got one thing right in his life, and it was the following: sports is, after all, the toy department. Everything else he said for 15 or 20 years when he was doing radio off and on was wrong. But the one thing he was right about is sports is, after all, the toy department. Right. It's not life and death. And there are other things going, like now. There are things going on in this world versus the NCAA basketball tournament or the NBA and the beginning of the baseball season. There are things going on in this world, in this country, that are more important than the world of sports. And I think, honestly, that's what I believe. And he wasn't right about many things, but he was right about that.
Candy Eveling, chat room, favorite interview.
I'm sorry?
Candy Eveling in the chat room, favorite interview. And by the way, the questions are being exhibited on our screen as well.
Favorite interview. I know I've done so many interviews. It's hard to say. I mean, I'm a good friend of Pete Arbogast, the voice of USC football. And every time I talk to Pete on the air, I really enjoy it because we are good friends. I don't know favorite interview. You know, I mean, I interviewed Vinscully, Ross Porter, all the Dodger announcers. Vinscully was the best I've ever heard, and the best anybody's ever heard, I think, in baseball. I don't think you can really argue about that. And so probably Scully from that perspective. But the one I enjoyed the most probably was Pete Arbogast, because we're friends. And he's the head of the Sportscasters here in Southern California. So he's always inviting people to go to their meetings.
Which I'm a member of, by the way. I still am a member, even though I'm on the East Coast. I'm a member of that organization. I went a couple of years ago during 2020.
Okay, you want to hear? Okay, so when I used to go in the 80s, it was like $5 or $10 for lunch. Yeah. You know what it is now?
Yeah, 120. 100. Yeah, over 100 bucks.
That's exactly.
So I see the emails all the time. It's one thing for me to fly out to Southern California, and while you're at it, why don't you just pull a $120 bill, and all of a sudden, and now from what I understand, they're doing it for breakfast too, not lunch. So
yeah, they did it breakfast.
I need breakfast that's worth $120. I realize things are in SoCal, but I haven't found that $120 breakfast, and we don't have that here in Southern Florida, not SoCal. All right, let's go back to the chat room. How about this activity? Didn't I tell you, Fred? We're going to have some people here. All right, Frank Lozinski has arrived. Another one of my young pups. Like, well, here you go. This guy at least knows how to use some rhyme. Fred Wallin, it must be ballin'. Well, pop that rhyme. All right. So, have you ever worked with Jimmy the Whistle, LA legend?
Who?
All right, Joshua, you might want to clarify that. Jimmy the Whistle, LA legend. Clarify that. And by the way, Pete Arbogast, I got to meet him. You're right. He's really a nice guy. Yeah, you ever heard of Andy Lascano many years ago?
Yeah. You want to go back to Pete? Let's go back to Pete Arbogast for a moment.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've always been a UCLA honk, and he's of course a USC honk. But his dad, Bob Arbogast, was one of the best radio guys in the history of Southern California. He was unbelievable. Originally just spinning records, but then doing a talk show on 570 KLAC. With Jack Margolis, and it was called Arbogast and Margolis, and that's how I met him. There was a big get together. I forgot the political thing, but it was like. But anyways, so the funny story is that he's working at KMPC, and the owner of the station, of course, is Gene Autry, the cowboy.
Right.
And Gene Autry introduces him to somebody, but he called him another host's name. He misnamed him. So what Bob Arbogast did was said to the guy, "Yeah, hi Roy Rogers, how you doing?" And Gene Autry and Roy Rogers weren't necessarily friends, so he got fired the next day. But Pete Arbogast grew up in the industry, and again, his father was just so good, it was unbelievable.
Now, Joshua says he's referring to the old hockey referee, Jimmy the Whistle from L.A. Does that ring a bell all to you?
No.
All right, Josh, sorry about that, pal. All right, so I know we probably, all right, Candy said, all right, put it up again, Candy. Who that you interviewed challenged you the most to interview? I'm sure there are some guys out there that have challenged you quite a bit.
Maybe when we got political, it's like but very few times anything like that ever happened. They, with the thing about the HIV and the Magic Johnson, his agent called me, people called me from the Lakers and things like that. And so off the air, I got into some heated discussions, but on the air, I really have never been, it's never been a major a major fight between anybody on the radio. I honestly, I haven't, there isn't anything that really stands out as far as that is concerned. I will tell you that when I was at doing the morning on KMPC 710, when Jimrome was just starting on the competitor station in San Diego, the mighty 690. And I called him the youthful Yenta. And so I got a call from their program director, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Just having fun." And so half the people don't know what Yenta means anyway, so it didn't really hit. And but as far as interviews on the air, honestly, there haven't been really many that stand out as far as being strikingly antagonistic or competitive or combative. I really, there haven't been any.
Now, if I recall correctly, Tomharmon was once the president of Southern California Sports Broadcasters. Is that correct, I believe?
Now who?
Tomharmon?
I believe so. There have been a lot. Pete's the guy.
Well, I know he is now. I'm talking about going.
He was.
So now there might be some NCIS fans out here. Have you ever had the pleasure of meeting Markharmon at all out in LA? I mean, NCIS has really become a thing these days with Markharmon. I have to tell you, I do enjoy his character on that show. But do you have any Markharmon stories or any observations about Markharmon?
No, but I have a Tomharmon story for you. Are you ready?
Go ahead. I'll take it. Go ahead. Give it to me.
In the mid 1970s, there was the Tomharmon Sports Magazine, and they published in Las Vegas. So for a year and a half, I flew to Vegas, and I was their math guy, their numbers guy. That's what I'm best at. And this one time, we were rushing to the airport together. Now, you got to remember, this is 25 years after he was the Heisman winner in Michigan. I was 20, just out of college. And we had to race to get on the plane. And I swear to you, Scott, he beat me by 100 yards. And when I got there, he started laughing. And I was, I told you I was going to play basketball at Arizona, so it wasn't like I wasn't athletic from that perspective. But the Heisman winner beat me by 100 to 200 yards to the plane to come back to LA. So that's I've never met Mark, but liked his movies, like his television work. But Tom was still a great athlete 25 years after his Heisman days for the Wolverines.
Yeah, Chris Roberts used to tell me all kinds of story about how Tom really did. I mean, Tomharmon went out there and did an incredible job at that organization, and it's carried on as well. So, all right. So Blake Lozinski has a question. Have you ever interviewed Chris Turk?
Chris who?
Turk, Turk.
I don't think so.
All right. Well, not jogging your memory there. Jesse Stuber has a high problem too. All right. Well, that's fine. All right. So that's interesting stuff. So, all right. So let's talk about best assignments. I know in our industry, there probably have been. I've had a lot of great ones through the years, but are there any best assignments you've had? And I also saw in your bio that you work with John Wooden, who I love John Wooden. I met him over at Pauley Pavilion. To me, John Wooden is one of the greatest interviews I've ever had, if not the greatest. You'll find out as you go deeper in the book, but let's keep this focused on you. The best assignments that you've had through the years.
The best assignment I ever had through the years, I was let's go back. Bill Brown, who became the Houston Astros baseball announcer for like 30 years. 1985, he's getting the job with the Astros. He's the program director of FNN Score.
Okay.
And FNN Score came on right after the stock market. And he hired me as the program director to replace him.
Mhm.
And so after about a year, I'd go on the air sometimes, but mostly I was the program director. But somebody from WFAN, when it was first starting, saw me on the air, their program director, and he called me up and he says, "Hey, listen, Pete Franklin, we hired from Cleveland, but he had a heart attack. Do you want to come here and fill in?" So I actually was at WFAN the very first day they went on the air in July of 1987.
Right.
So I did three. It was owned by MS Broadcasting, which means the truth. It was run by Jeff Smolian, who is still well, I don't think he's involved in radio now, but they put me up over Central Park. It was the most beautiful 3 weeks you could ever have in radio. And then I thought it was over. And then they called me and they said, Greggumbel's taking 2 weeks off. You want to fill in for him? And then it happened 3 times. So in the first 6 months of WFAN, I was on 7 weeks, put me up over Central Park. And I'd been to New York before, but not overlooking Central Park. So I just walk around when I wasn't on the air. And then they offered me not a full-time thing, but a job working a couple days a week and then doing reports. But instead I went to KABC. So looking back, well, I'm a Los Angeles person. I've lived here 99% of my life.
Right.
I probably made a bad mistake in not working at WFAN. And now on TuneIn, the app, I listen to a WFAN almost every night. And no offense, but we were better in 1987 than the guys doing it now. It's a different thing. When we were doing it, you had Greg Gumbel and Jim Lampley and people like that. And they'd be talking about national stuff and local stuff.
Right.
Now it's purely local. Who can help the Mets? Who can help the Yankees? If you know what I'm saying. It's not a national thing, and that I enjoy more. But I listen to it because it's 3,000 miles away, and you get a different opinion. So when you do your own show, in my case, you pick up something that what they're saying on WFAN. So in answer to your question, I would say best assignment was 7 weeks WFAN when it first started.
Beautiful. Well, you obviously know about Ernie Harwell of the Tigers. He's a guy that he's like an uncle to me, mentor, you name it. And I've had a lot of great sportscasters in the metro area. By the way, good evening, Jeremy Ballrick, another guy in my system that's worked hard to progress. So a lot of my young guys are popping in today. Although Jeremy's actually in his 50s, he got into business a little bit later. He does a really good job with his Lions work, the kneecap biting. So we have a lot of, and I'm going to lead to a couple of questions along those lines. But yeah, again, we talk about different markets. I know about WFAN, and I've heard of Pete Franklin as well. I remember many, many years ago out in Cleveland. And back then I remember you'd have Paul Harvey with the rest of the story and all these syndicated guys that you would hear all the time. And when you would hear these syndicated guys, idolize them because you felt like when you were in the media, you were in the real media. I'll get into that other part in just a moment. But I can appreciate everything you're talking about in terms of the national media, market size. Nowadays, guys don't have to go to the number 1 or 2 market anymore to think they're big stuff. They can be right where they're at, and it's just a different hiring system altogether. So with that said, that leads me to, let me transition over to this, okay? Obviously, the big part of my book is old school media versus new school media. So what is your perception of old school media as you and I know it, whether it's a terrestrial radio as well as old time TV when you used to have 3 to 5 stations at the most and a bunch of AM FM stations? I miss those days, don't you?
I miss those days so much you wouldn't believe it. Again, I was brought up in Culver City, California. This is before you got very few Ram home games because unless it was sold out, you didn't get it. So my uncle, because my dad wouldn't go on the roof, my uncle and I went on the roof and we put a high gain antenna. Mm-hmm. And so we could pick up San Diego and Santa Barbara. And that's how much I love getting extra stations, extra channels, things like that. In fact, there was one day that in Los Angeles, we didn't get any game, but in San Diego, Channel 8, KFMB, they had the Bears game against the 49ers at Wrigley Field in Chicago. And that was the day that Gale Sayers scored 6 touchdowns. So Fred, as a teenager, might have been one of the few people in Los Angeles who had the opportunity to see that day. And I'll never forget it. And so it was different then. I mean, obviously now you got 500 channels on cable, and they charge you $250 a month, and whatever on DirecTV. And it's interesting. You mentioned John Wooden before.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up with John Wooden, and Fred Hessler was the announcer, 1964, and they had the perfect season. They had Walt Hazard and Gail Goodrich at the guards, and they won all 30 games. And they put together a record called The Perfect Season. On my Facebook, Fred Hessler's daughter is there, and she had forgotten about it. And then she said, like on Facebook, she said, "Thank you. I'm gonna listen to it right now." And so Fred Hessler was an underrated Southern California sportscaster, and John Wooden, as you said, you can't be any better than winning 10 national titles, 7 in a row. He won with Goodrich and Hazard. The biggest guy in the team was Fred Slaughter at 6'5", and then he went with the big guy. He won with the big guys in Kareem, Lou Alcindor, and Walton, and he won in between with Sidney Wicks and Curtis Rowe. And it's hard to believe he retired in 1975. The only championship UCLA's won since Jim Herrick, 1995, for the Bruins, when Tyus Edney made the steal against Missouri in the first round. And then they go on to, he made the basket, and they win. And then they win the championship in 95. And that's 29 years ago. So it's hard to believe that time does fly.
Yeah, I'll say one thing about John Wooden. To me, I live by the pyramids of success. I really do. I take that pyramid of success, I have it right in my office, and I look at it all the time. And since I talked to Coach Wooden when I had the opportunity to interview him one time, I guess before the University of Georgia, he was the most approachable person in the world, just one of the greatest people I've ever met. When I talk about old school media being in the Metro Detroit area, guess what? All I had to do was go across the Windsor Bridge, and we had CKLW. We used to watch Hockey Night Canada on Channel 9, and then we had the local stuff. All right, so I mean, Hockey Night Canada. How many people know that in Southern Cal? Probably nobody. But anyways,
you mentioned Canada.
Yeah.
My mom was a sports fan, and my dad was a sports fan, and they would take me to UCLA games when I was very young, and Dodger games when I was very young, and things like that. But my mother's dad, my granddad, couldn't read English, but he loved the horses. So my mother, Bernice, had to go with him to Canada over that bridge that you're talking about. I don't know how often, to read the race. She had to go with him so she could read the racing form to him. So horse racing wasn't her thing. Other sports were. But you mentioned that bridge, something I will never forget. You told me when I was very, very young that bridge wasn't too far away, and bridge not too far, and in Canada.
Well, I can tell you a story one time. I actually don't mind telling it to you. I was dating a woman, one of my girlfriends in the past, and you know what? She forgot her ID one time. So, yeah, well, that was then. So, I told her, I said, well, Diane, I hate to tell you this. Name with Diane, I'm going to have to leave you here because you're never going to get back. You can't do that to me. You can't do that to me. So I put on the biggest poker face because, this is on Thanksgiving now. And Thanksgiving there, a normal day, but not in Michigan where you had the parade and the lions and all that. But no, I just put out a poker face and made her sweat up. Don't forget your ID. You never know how to bite you. So, but am I that ruthless? No, but you can't take that. Nowadays you can get away with it. Back then it was a little bit looser. So with that said, let's switch it over to another aspect of what I did write in the book called New Media. You know what? I've never seen a situation where we had to acclimate so much to streaming. And not only whether it's Zoom, I know COVID-19 excelled that a bit more. You're dealing with communications, people that are young, that don't return emails and all that. I mean, the beat goes on and on. So what are your thoughts about what media has become in terms of new school media? We talk about all the streaming, as well as all the internet radio. I mean, like I said, I miss those days, but what's your perception of what new media is today?
Well, again, just listening to WFAN, it's just New York, New York, New York. We were doing the shows all the time. It was national stuff and the local stuff. I enjoyed that more, and I always will enjoy that more. But most of the shows that I've heard from San Diego or San Diego oriented, at night I can listen to San Francisco, and they're Giants oriented and not really anything beyond that as far as national. And so it's sort of like, can you take it seriously?
Right.
I don't think so, because it's just pro local stuff, and they're not going to see. When I'm at KBC, Steve Sachs was the second baseman,
right?
And we interviewed him before the 1988 season, I think. Stu Nahan and myself, and they had just signed another second baseman named Mike Sharperson. And if you remember correctly, Steve had the yips where he couldn't throw it to first base.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I said to him on the air, it wasn't the first question, but it was in the middle of the conversation. I said, Steve, they just signed Mike Sharperson, and this is before the DH or anything. How do you feel about that? And he says, whatever Skip wants, I'm happy to be part of the team, this and this and this. Then we go to a break, and he says, you blank, 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 blank. How dare you ask me? I'm Steve Sachs, and I'm an all-star. Swear to God. We go back on the air, and he goes back to the BS again. So he became an arch enemy. He tried to get me fired at KBC, along with right fielder Mike Marshall. And one day, Mike Scioscia, the catcher and the captain, said, come over here if you can. And so we went to the Dodger dugout, and they said, Steve says you've been saying negative things about him. And I said, no, I'm just saying the truth. He doesn't have an arm at this point, and he hurts the team. And anyway, so they go to Peter O'Malley, and they try to get me fired. So I go in there, and they're on the other side of the room, and Peter O'Malley turns to them, and he says the following: guys, Fred is the most objective guy we've ever had doing sports talk and Dodger talk.
Mm-hmm.
He loves the Dodgers as much as you do, and get the blank out of here. So I've been a friend of Peter O'Malley's ever since, and he stood up for me, and it's something that when I talk about this business, of all the things, we talk about the negative, all the things positive was Mr. Peter O'Malley. There wasn't anybody, he didn't have to do that. I was just a talk show host. He didn't have to do that, but he told his own guys to get out of the office, and it's something I will never forget.
It's a great story. So with that said, who did you idolize as a sportscaster growing up?
Well, when I was a real young kid, it was Duke Snider. I mean, My dad said, turns on the TV, and he says that's the best player in baseball. And I swear to you, the next pitch, he hits a home run. I got a picture of Duke behind me. So he died 13 years ago, this last month. But Duke Snider was my childhood hero, and always has been. I finally interviewed him when I was doing the FNN Scores show. And my girlfriend at the time, Linda, as he left, she said, can you sign this baseball for Fred? He'll never ask you. And of course, Duke did. And the ironic thing was we picked him up at a card show, and then to drive him to the network. And then afterward, we drove him back. And so Linda asked him for the baseball, which I have up here, and something I'll never forget. But I'll tell you an interesting story. Sure. My favorite Dodger was Duke Snider, and my second favorite Dodger was Sandy Koufax.
Okay.
So it's 1964 now, and Duke's last season, and people don't remember this, but he's playing for the Giants. And the Giants have run out of right-handed pinch hitters, and all they have left is Snider against Koufax. So I remembered that as 3 pitches, strike 3, you're out. Now I asked Duke about that, and I said what I just said. I said, Sandy was my second favorite. You were my favorite. What do you remember about that? And he said, Sandy was laughing so hard that he walked me on 4 pitches. So I'm not going to disagree with him because I don't remember. I mean, he was living it. I just something in my mind that he struck out on 3 pitches. To this day, I don't know what's correct. He either struck out on 3 pitches or he walked on 4. But when you ask like what the most humorous situation you ever been on radio, that was one of them. It really was with Duke talking about Sandy. Oh, and I'll tell you something. You want to hear a story about Sandy?
Sure, go ahead.
I became good friends with Don Drysdale. Okay, so we're walking to lunch, and we walk into the restaurant, and Sandy is talking to somebody, and all we hear Sandy is saying is, and tell that SOB Frank Thomas that I never threw at anybody. And we're talking about the old Frank Thomas who played for Pittsburgh and the Cubbies, not the new Frank Thomas who played for the White Sox. Okay. Right. So he says, tell that SOB Frank Thomas that I never threw at anybody. So now Sandy leaves, says goodbye. Bye, Sandy. Bye. And then first question I asked Don Drysdale was, Don, what was Sandy saying about Frank Thomas? He said, oh, Frank Thomas would call him all kinds of anti-Jewish names. And so Sandy obviously didn't like it. So he threw at him a few times. So, that's another story that I'll never forget as long as I live.
I met Sandy Koufax in 1985 at the Florida State League All-Star Game. Really nice to me. It was neat. And also I should point out, too, that, the Dodgers obviously trained in Dodger Town over in Vero Beach. So I always missed Vinscully. I couldn't get there when he did get there. I wish I would have met him. Never did. Tried to get up there to fly to SoCal for the one event. Didn't work out. Heard him in the background, but that was one, but just wasn't meant to happen. All right, one other thing I want to mention before we talk about our upcoming show, and that being this, okay? Tommy Lasorda was really huge for me as a young kid growing up in the business. My first major interview, I have nothing but positive things to say about Tommy. He did a lot for my confidence when I was younger, and he was always accessible when I wanted him. But what are your thoughts about Tom Lasorda?
He called me a second guesser.
Oh, did he?
And he never forgot that. I wasn't a second guesser, I told him. I'm a first guesser. And, I would say things. And that in the 1988 season, I mentioned that their center fielder, John Shelby, got hurt. And I said that there's no way on earth. People were talking about Kirk Gibson playing center field. And I said, and this is why I'm talking about this business. You have to say some good things if you're going to say anything negative. So I said, great in the clubhouse, great power, great speed. He'll do anything for the team. But the one thing he can't do is throw, because at Michigan State, when he was the wide receiver, he hurt his arm and he couldn't throw.
Right.
So I got a lot of heat for that. I really did. Somebody from Major League Baseball, a writer, said one day, you better not go in the clubhouse. Gibson's going to kill you. So I did. He didn't do anything. But I'm just saying that he didn't hear the first 9 good things I said. Team player, great speed, most valuable player on the team. But the one thing he can't do is throw. And again, you're from Michigan. He can't play. You can't play him in center field and expect to win. I mean, there's going to be too many base runners taking advantage.
But as far as Tommy Lasorda, what are your interactions with him? Were they more positive or more negative?
Negative.
Okay.
Because he didn't like anybody saying that he made a mistake or I wouldn't have done that. It's just like, and again, you folks that don't know this, when they signed Sandy Koufax in 1955, they gave him a bonus. So he, under Major League rules, he had to play on the Major League team, the Brooklyn Dodgers, and the person they set down was Tommy Lasorda. So it's a small world, a crazy world, but that's what we're in.
All right, coming up after the Motor City Mad Mouse show, we do have the Sports Exchange. I'll be joined by George Eichhorn, Jacob Krishner, and JB Ellis. So let's go ahead and talk about what we have to look forward to on April 26th. You're giving me the opportunity to promote my book, Lessons from the Microphone. Tell me what that experience is like. I know we're going to be doing like 13, 15 minutes or so. So, and let everybody know how they can hear the broadcast as well, as you give me the opportunity to promote my book on your airwaves.
It's a late night, Friday night and Saturday night in Michigan. It's 10 o'clock Pacific, 1 o'clock in the East, Friday night, Saturday morning, and Saturday night, Sunday
Right.
morning. And then it runs 2 hours later. So it's going to run 4 times, at least 4 times. Sometimes it runs 6 times, but at least 4 times. Go to TuneIn, go to Sports Byline USA, go to the various radio stations, including KSHP 1400 in Las Vegas. And, it's not ESPN, but we're on 10 or 15 radio stations across America. And I wish we were still in Grand Rapids, but we're not. And it'll be a fun 13 and a half minutes. I guarantee you, Scott.
Oh, you know what, Fred? I'm really looking forward to it. As soon as you mentioned you wanted me on, I couldn't get that book out fast enough. And I was looking forward to putting you on here tonight. And I'm telling you, it's really been a lot of fun just talking sports, SoCal. And I know we talked about a lot of different things, but you know what? Hey, listen, I'm a Southern California boy at heart because I know a lot about the area. I've had a lot of good past dealings with it as well. And to have a guy like you on tonight, to me, has been an absolute pleasure. And I'm looking forward to bring you on a future show if you want to come on and we can talk LA sports. But this is a great first act for us, Fred. It really, really was. I want to let everybody know, too, also, that our website's www.southfloridatribune.com. You can find me on Twitter /X at Tribune South. Candy Ebling is behind the scenes. And my book is Lessons from the Microphone, Tuning into the Enduring Wisdom of Visionary Leaders. It's available on Kindle and Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And we're also working on some more providers as well. So it can be obtained a lot of different ways. You can get the e-version or you can get the hard copy either way. It's a good read for people that are learning about the industry or people that have been in the industry, which is why I built a theme, Fred, around old school media versus new school media. It's a very good educational book that if you're not too old to learn, then you're going to have a lot of fun with it. And I bring up a lot of people in and out of sports, like Frank Reynolds is one of the favorite people that I like to bring up because he talked about the assassination attempt. And here's a guy that stands for a lot of good things because he's not about getting it first, it's about getting it right. And I think that's the one thing we can't lose sight of in journalism. So, Fred, do you want to let everybody know how they can reach you as well?
I'm on Facebook, just under Fred Wallin, and I'm a computer idiot, so I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on anything else, just Facebook. And I talk probably more politics than sports, but we talk both. And I appreciate the time. It's been a lot of fun. It really has.
Well, Fred, feelings are mutual. Anytime I can talk to a guy that's been in the business as long as I have, it definitely conjures up a lot of memories for sure. It really does because, you and I can compare stories back and forth. And I think that's the one thing don't get me wrong. I like a lot of the aspiring young broadcasters that are coming up. But let's face it, I have a soft spot for people that I can relate to closer to my age or a little bit older that we can talk about the good old days because I'm going to tell you, Fred, I make no bones about it. They were the good old days. And I wish a lot of these millennials could have experienced what it was like when we did it because while everybody has more access to a microphone, back when we did it, it wasn't those that had more access. It was those that were more deserving of being behind the microphone and working at the newspapers and things like that really talked about what our industry is, and that is media in general. So once again, it's been such a pleasure to have you on. But you know what? I'm looking forward to having you on again. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
All right. So meanwhile, on behalf of Fred Wallin, my name is Scott Morganroth. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the Motor City Man Mouse Show. Coming up afterwards, we got the Sports Exchange. I mentioned the people involved. Meanwhile, everybody have yourself a great night, and I'm looking forward to being on Fred's show. I'll be doing this thing with him on April the 26th, the NFL Draft. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We appreciate the participation in the chat room. Joshua, Blake, George, Jeremy, and the rest. So take care, everybody, and we'll catch you on the Sports Exchange shortly. Good night, everybody.